Hurricane Laura tonight. Now, we're still a little while away from landfall, and Chief Meteorologist Erica Lopez is with us, along with meteorologist Hunter Williams, tracking this storm. Let's start getting up to speed on where we are right at this hour. We're going to reset things for you tonight. The winds picking up on the coast at this hour. Hurricane Laura still a Category 4 storm, and powers like this, storms like this, could have immense effect on land once it hits landfall. Wind speeds about 150 miles an hour. Set to make landfall again in a couple of hours from now, between midnight and 1 a.m. The National Hurricane Center is warning of unsurvivable storm surge. That's the big problem that they're looking at with this storm. Catastrophic damage across all areas of wherever this makes landfall. Looks to be right to the west of Lake Charles, Louisiana. So let's check back in with Chief Meteorologist Erica Lopez with the very latest this evening.
Okay, we're going to start off with the latest stats that are coming out from the National Hurricane Center with the 10 p.m. advisory. So we have wind speeds sustained at 100 miles an hour. Those are the maximum wind speeds that are around the eye of this hurricane, and the pressure, it's actually increased a couple of millibars. Now, increasing pressure is good. That means the storm is slightly weakening, but not enough before landfall. We're still expecting a Category 4 landfall within the next couple of hours. So I want to kind of compare what we see on satellite, on infrared imagery. Notice it looks a little bit more widespread. This is showing cloud tops versus what's actually happening at the surface with rain, right? We want to watch for the threat of flooding. We're going to continue to watch for the threat of gusty winds, and we're also going to continue to watch the threat for storm surge. Right now, we're starting to see some action. Heavy rain bands starting to move inland around the Lake Charles area. As far as the track, north-northwest at 15 miles an hour still. There's the pressure, 939 millibars. We have one active tornado warning that's in effect right now. We have had numerous tornado warnings. Yes, tornadoes are a threat when we're talking about tropical systems moving inland and making landfall. That one is in effect until 10:45. Now, a few flood warnings have been issued also, this one specifically for the Neches River. Above flood stage now, and we're tracking this to be an issue, especially with the storm surge that will begin to move inland with the possibility of storm surge of up to 20 feet. So several flood warnings in effect for those areas. This is going to continue to be an issue as far as wind speeds go. We are now seeing sustained winds in the 30-mile-an-hour range, but gusts of up to 55 miles an hour. That's a strong tropical storm force wind out in the Lake Charles area, and computer models have been consistently showing that areas just in the path of this storm, which would be Lake Charles, are going to have the greatest impacts with this system. Okay, let me talk about your forecast wind forecast for late tonight into tomorrow. Track of the storm making landfall somewhere along the state line. Most of the computer models are showing a southwest landfall for Louisiana. That's going to continue to race north along the state line. And notice by early tomorrow morning, Lake Charles still seeing some strong winds associated with this system as it continues to race to the north. And then we're tracking Shreveport in the path of this storm, moving up to Little Rock. Again, winds are going to be a major concern, and then our second major concern will be the storm surge, where the threat of storm surge of up to 20 feet is possible for areas along the circulation and east of the circulation. Notice the western side, which is the drier side, the quieter side of a tropical system. Storm surge possible as high as about 4 feet. So again, we'll be monitoring this as we fast forward through the rest of this evening, giving you the latest updates, and also expecting landfall sometime around midnight. We'll be tracking that. So I'm going to toss things back to Quita and Brian.
Thanks, Erica. And we also want to check back in with KVUE's Bryce Newberry tonight.
That's right, Bryce. You've been following the news about evacuations and shelters in Austin all day today. Now you're down at the convention center. How are things set up there tonight?
Yeah, Brian, the convention center is where people evacuating from the storm zones will be able to stay because area hotel rooms are pretty filled up. I want to show you this picture that I just took looking inside of the convention center. You can see, hopefully that's on your screen now, you can see the cots there, which we also saw crews using a tape measure just to make sure that all of those cots are spread out enough to follow the COVID-19 guidelines. So they are hoping to get this open open tonight. They are hoping that people who are still out at Circuit of the Americas can get here and stay here because they're still looking for more hotel rooms in the area. So I also want to show you this video from Circuit of the Americas earlier. There were long lines. People were waiting a long time in order to get any sort of accommodations for the night. Some people were there 7, 8 hours waiting, and some of them even ran out of gas. They had to be pushed by the Austin Fire Department. You can see in this video just how long that line extended. A lot of people who were out there that we talked to were glad to be out of the storm zone, but of course a little exhausted waiting so long to figure out where they're going to stay tonight while considering this giant storm is barreling toward their homes.
We're just trying to, take it one step at a time. We ain't gonna do too much complaining. We really come from a subtropical area, so we kind of deal with this weather.
If you call 911, nobody's gonna be able to come save you. You're gonna be out of luck by tomorrow. So we left, and then when they said it's gonna be like Rita, and we evacuated for Rita, which was like 15 years ago, but they say Laura gonna be a monster, so we got to go.
So as of this morning, Austin Travis County has about 3,000 evacuees staying in the area, filling more than 1,000 hotel rooms. The fire official who I just spoke with here at the convention center says the plan is to have it open by 11 o'clock in order to start accepting some of those evacuees while the city continues looking for any additional hotel rooms that might be available in the area. Brian, Quita.
All right, thank you very much. That is our Bryce Newberry down at the Austin Convention Center where they are having evacuees go this evening. And we want to storm from space. That is incredible. You can see just how big it is swirling over the ocean. And if you measure it and count the outer bands of the storm, the width of it is about as wide as the state of Texas.
Now, the storm surge, as Erica mentioned just a bit ago, is a big concern with this storm. Let's talk about what that means. The storm surge of between 5 and 7 feet could send water into homes and businesses, even cover the roof of a car. When that reaches 7 to 12 feet, it's enough to fill the first floor of a building. 12 to 15 feet, which is what we're looking at in the main path of this storm, could put many homes underwater. 20 feet would, of course, overwhelm cities. That's how much water we're talking about there. Let's check back in now with Hunter Williams, meteorologist Hunter Williams tonight. Hunter, this storm has gained some steam over the last day or so, but it seems like it's really focused in on an area there right at the Louisiana border.
Yeah, we're now probably about 2 hours away from landfall, Brian. Winds are at 150 miles per hour, as Erica was telling you with the previous update. The pressure at 939, that has actually come up a bit since that previous advisory, but still, this remains an extremely dangerous storm. We've been trying to keep this in historical perspective for everybody, so let's go over some of the high points here. Laura would be the first major hurricane to landfall in Louisiana since Rita in 2005. You heard some folks on our newscast earlier talking about their experience with that storm. Only 9 hurricanes have made landfall in the United States with winds of 150 miles per hour or higher, which are the current winds that Laura is packing. And as far as Louisiana goes, there's only been 1 hurricane with winds of 150 miles per hour. Here's a look at that list. Again, 9 of these storms landfalling in the United States. Number 1, that's the Labor Day hurricane from back in 1935, had winds of 185. As things stand now, it would be tied, Laura, that is, with the 5th place. That would be Hurricane Charlie, and then down towards number 9, that's the last island hurricane. But it's not just the wind speeds that are notable. It's the place that this storm is going to make landfall. The dots that you see here, the yellow dots, Cat 4 landfalls, the red dots, Category 5 landfalls. Notice as we zoom in here on far southwestern Louisiana, there has never been a Category 4 or 5 landfall in this area. Unfortunately, that's going to be changing here in a matter of a couple of hours. A very impressive storm. We'll be watching it very closely. Quita.
Thank you, Hunter. And you know, we want to get back out to Luis De Leon, who is in North Beaumont tonight, and Beaumont, of course, is in the path of Hurricane Laura. And Luis, I know the wind is starting to pick up out there.
It is, Quita. It's also actually starting to rain just a little bit. I will say, for my photographer, Heikki Mastonen, and I, this is probably the most consistent that we've felt an actual like stronger wind over the time that we've actually been here. We are in the parking lot of Market Basket, that store that was boarded up. We brought that to you earlier. Still an empty parking lot. Just that one truck back there that's getting ready to bring out some fuel to power up some generators tomorrow after the storm passes. But we do want to break down everything that we have seen so far. We arrived at around noon yesterday, and we ended up outside of an Academy Sports and Outdoors. They closed up right at noon on Tuesday. People made the dash to get in and out of the store for last-second items, and later that day, we went to downtown Beaumont to find buses shuttling inmates back and forth from the Jefferson County Correctional Facility in South Beaumont on Highway 69 up to the Jefferson County Jail. They made that move, hundreds of inmates by the way, and the sheriff told us that it was much more stable to bring people into town because that correctional facility they were transferring from was from south of Beaumont. But overall they felt that the building in town was much safer for the inmates and employees overall. Take a listen.
We don't want, anything to happen at the facility, first of all, that might jeopardize the safety of the community. First, if there's a breach in the jail.
And of course, we also saw a lot of buses staged around the city to help with evacuations. We also made our way to Port Arthur to that seawall that we've spent so much time at. We spent much of yesterday and today keeping eyes on the water and the town around it. It's a wall that protected so many homes for so many years, where some of the residents who live behind it told us that they plan on riding out the storm because they say they feel prepared. They've been through these hurricanes a few times.
I mean, I think on this one it's just going to be more of a wind event, but who knows? You know what I mean?
We always gotta be nervous because you don't know what's gonna happen with the hurricane. The category keeps changing randomly. We really don't know what to expect.
Now, as you can see, it is a lot wetter out here now, if you will. It's been dry really for most of the day. There was a little spurt of rain earlier on where it actually had me running into the hotel. We showed you that video earlier as well, but the wind is starting to pick up a little bit. It actually just died down towards the end of that last interview that we just aired, so that gives you a sort of sense of how inconsistent some of these winds are. It'll go a little bit harder, and all of a sudden it just tapers down just a little bit. But the rain is starting to come down. We're going to be out here throughout the night to show you some of the sights and sounds of this storm. So for now, reporting in Beaumont, Luis De Leon, KVUE News.
Hey, Luis, you've talked about the evacuations. You've seen people leaving there in Beaumont and in Port Arthur. What is it like now there? You mentioned there's not a whole lot going on around you. Have you seen first responders? Have you seen people around, or is it pretty much deserted for the most part?
So, Brian, it's pretty much deserted for the most part, but those are the people that we will see walking around are those first responders. With the exception, we were downtown in Beaumont earlier this afternoon. We were coming to you live from there. We did actually see one group of people that was just walking around. It was actually the largest group of people that we've seen just simply walking around, almost looking like nothing was going on. But they were there because they were actually hunkering down. They were from the city of Orange, which is not far from here. They're hunkering down in a hotel near that area. But yeah, so far it has been empty everywhere that we have gone. We really have tried to continue finding more people to kind of share their stories, but that's also sort of a good thing because a lot of residents have heeded the warnings and gotten out of Beaumont and Port Arthur.
That is good to know. They heeded the warnings. Thank you, Luis. Stay safe out there. And we're going to take one more look outside tonight as we track Hurricane Laura's approach to the coast. Now, we're still a couple of hours from it hitting land. You can see out there, not a person to be seen. It is just deserted right now. And Chief Meteorologist Erica Lopez and Meteorologist Hunter Williams both here keeping a close eye on things tonight. We'll have another update on the storm's track when we come back.
Let's check in with what's going on with Hurricane Laura. Still a Category 4, and the eye of the hurricane is about 36 miles away from the coast. So what does that mean? If we are moving at 15 miles an hour, we have a couple of hours till landfall. It's approaching the southwest corner of Louisiana, but notice widespread heavy rain is ongoing with active tornado warnings. Also a tornado watch that's in effect until tomorrow morning, but notice how far inland that flash flood warning is in effect. It continues to move all the way up north into Arkansas, so that's why we're expecting flash flooding concerns if you're in the path of this storm. I want to talk a little bit more about these tornado warnings that are active at the moment. This is all for the coastal areas of Louisiana, and we're tracking some rotation, which is not uncommon when we talk about tropical systems within these rain bands. They're very quick spin-ups, but the hard part is that it's night. It's dark outside. We always talk about the fact that tornadoes and hurricanes are extremely dangerous at night if you did not listen to city officials and were under mandatory evacuations and did not leave your area. This is one of the reasons why the several tornado warnings that have been on and off across this viewing area. So let's walk through the latest forecast cone coming out from the National Hurricane Center. I'm going to take you through it hour by hour. Still expecting it to be a Category 4 at landfall for southwest Louisiana. Then it's going to continue to race up the Louisiana and Texas state line, possibly a Category 2 hurricane weakening by tomorrow morning. Jason Michael will be in tomorrow morning giving us updates as the storm continues to move inland. And then this is why that flash flooding threat remains in effect for as far north as Arkansas, because this system is going to take a lot of moisture with it. On top of it, still tropical storm force winds all the way through Thursday night into Friday before it kind of dissipates, and it won't be until late next week, or excuse me, early this weekend, I should say, that we'll be talking about remnants of Hurricane Laura. So as of the latest advisory coming out from the National Hurricane Center, which was the 10 p.m. advisory, and they are giving us updates every single hour, wind speeds are sustained at 150 miles an hour. But the very interesting thing is that the wind field is very compact with this storm. So it's not a very broad storm. Basically, you have to get very close to the center of circulation in order to really get those hurricane force winds. So that's why we're seeing wind gusts right now of only tropical storm force out in Lake Charles. It's just the beginning of it. But as this storm continues to push north, we're going to see that number continue to increase closer to hurricane force winds. And you really need to get close to the center of circulation, Hunter, in order to begin to feel those hurricane force winds. But Hunter, we've been talking all night that our main concern will be power outages because of the strong winds, and then storm surge will continue to be our main concerns.
Yeah, and especially with the storm surge, as you were mentioning, the wind field is fairly compact. And before our show started, we were looking at some of the gauges there in coastal Louisiana, and we've seen some storm surge up to 5 feet, some are up close to 6 feet. But because the core of the winds, Erica, are still offshore, it's really not going to get to peak surge until the core of those strongest winds in the core of the center pulls in closer to shore. And what you're looking at your screen is in the pink where the storm surge warnings have been posted. And then basically along and just to the east of the center of the track, that's where they're expecting the peak storm surge. That could be 15 to 20 feet. I mean, think about that. That could submerge homes, and not only immediately along the coast, but because of the terrain and the topography here, this could inundate up to 30 miles inland. So we talk a lot about the category and the wind speed and the pressure, but that's not the only factor with these storms. In fact, sometimes the wind can be the secondary factor, and oftentimes it is the storm surge that can create the most issues, and that is likely going to be the case with this storm. Despite the fact that it has winds up to 150 miles per hour, you can hide from winds from the water, you got to run away. Now what you're looking at, the rainfall forecast for this system, one of the perks of this storm moving fairly fast, at least for a tropical system, we've seen it moving anywhere between 15 and 17 miles per hour, is it's not a Harvey type storm. Again, not to compare them storm by storm, but it's not going to be that type of situation where it sits and it stalls and it dumps rain over the same areas. That's not going to happen. So less of a flood threat, but still the storm surge, a very real threat with this storm. We'll be watching it closely as it approaches landfall, likely over the next couple of hours. Quita.
Thank you very much. And as we mentioned, towns on the Gulf Coast, well, they're no strangers to tropical storms and hurricanes. But this hurricane, Hurricane Laura, it may follow the same path as a storm that became one of the deadliest in U.S. history. Bob Buckaloo takes a look back at 1957's Hurricane Audrey tonight.
Hurricane Laura has been on a path to strike near the Texas-Louisiana border. Almost the identical landfall of one of the deadliest hurricanes in U.S. history 63 years ago, Hurricane Audrey, which devastated Cameron Parish, Louisiana in June 1957. In that era, before weather satellites, it was harder to predict where a hurricane would strike and the timing of a storm's arrival. Only ground-based radar back then could capture a hurricane as it drew near the coastline. For the people of Cameron, it was too late to get to safety. More than 400 people died when the storm came ashore, a high death toll blamed on the incompleteness of evacuations when the storm suddenly increased its forward motion. Weather historians also blame a lack of urgency in the warnings that were issued, and even blamed local politicians for editing weather bulletins before they were broadcast to minimize the severity of the approaching storm. So many lessons learned from the tragedy of Hurricane Audrey. And with the advances in forecast technology today, we now have days and sometimes weeks to follow the path of a hurricane and to make preparations before time runs out. Bob Buckaloo, KVUE News.
Well, there are definitely no words being cut from the evacuation warnings that were out earlier today and yesterday. We're taking another live look at the coast tonight. It is dark out there, but the wind and the waves, they are starting to pick up a bit. And we'll take another look at this storm's path and what the conditions look like out there when we come back.
Unsurvivable storm surge.
KVUE's team of meteorologists
News at 10, another live look here at the coast on this Wednesday night. Hurricane Laura, of course, headed straight for right at the border of Texas and Louisiana. This is, I believe, Galveston, which is going to be lucky in this way. That's on the west side of that storm, so there's not going to be as much storm surge there. There's not going to be the heavy winds and rainfall that they were expecting in Galveston and the Houston area. So that's a bit of good news there as we head into the overnight hours. Quita.
It's definitely good news, Brian. And you know what? Let's check back in with Chief Meteorologist Erica Lopez and meteorologist Hunter Williams to track the storm. Hopefully they have some good news for us about the storm tonight.
Yeah, so the good news is that this storm is moving pretty quickly. So we are seeing it more compact also. So a lot of areas that are closer aren't going to see that great of an impact. You really got to get close to the eye, within a couple hundred miles, close to that eye wall, in order to feel those strong tropical storm force winds. But as a matter of fact, you have to get at about 60 miles within that storm, closer to the eye wall, and then you'll start to feel the hurricane force winds. That's where we will be able to find those sustained winds at 150 miles an hour. So this is where we've maxed out so far, 150 miles an hour, which puts us at a very strong Category 4 hurricane. It's moving to the north-northwest at 15 miles an hour, and the pressure, it's kind of fluctuated a little bit. Earlier tonight, it was at 940 millibars, and it dropped to 937, but the latest data coming out from Hurricane Hunters has increased that pressure a couple of millibars. So what that means is that it has weakened in strength just a little bit, not enough to really change the sustained winds, and that's typical with these storms. They go through cycles of weakening and re-strengthening, but the good news is that once it makes landfall, we're going to talk about this storm deteriorating very rapidly. It's not going to have the warm Gulf of Mexico waters to fuel these storms. Expecting landfall late tonight, still close to the Texas line, the state line of Texas and Louisiana, as a Category 4 major hurricane. And the biggest threats we're concerned about tonight will be the storm surge and the winds. The reason why our flooding threat is not major, it is going to happen. We already have flood warnings ongoing. We already have rivers and bayous that will begin to flood, but it could have been worse if this storm wasn't moving at 15 miles an hour. So notice the heaviest of the rain bands now starting to creep on in, as the eye wall is about 35 miles off of the coast. Once this eye wall begins to move inland, we'll be talking about a landfall as a Category 4 hurricane. These red polygons, those are tornado warnings that are ongoing right now for southern Louisiana. So rotation within these rain bands, very common, and it is going to be a threat. These tornado warnings are active until about 11:15 tonight. Here's a look at some of the first flood warnings that are popping up because of rivers that are at or above their flood stage already. And we still have to talk about not only rain that's going to continue to move in, but also the storm surge. And on top of that, once the system starts to push northward, any rain that will trickle down is just going to add insult to injury within these rivers and bayous that are already at or above their flood stage. So current winds right now, we're checking in with as far as Lake Charles goes, which is just ahead of the eye of this storm. 61-mile-an-hour winds puts it as a strong tropical storm force wind gust. The sustained winds are now at tropical storm force already. That's the first time I've seen someone with sustained winds at tropical storm force, but needless to say, we have hurricane warnings that extend all the way almost up to the northern border of Louisiana. And then this is why you can never just focus on the cone. The cone is the forecast for the eye, but we have tropical storm force winds that could extend a couple hundred miles away from that eye, Hunter, as it continues to travel northward.
Yeah, and as we're now getting within probably a couple of hours of our landfall, I want to continue to show you some of the historical perspective on this storm. So we've showed you that the pressure is now at 939 millibars, and I know the pressure can be kind of confusing. All you need to know, a lower pressure equals a stronger storm. So let's compare this to some other very notable hurricanes that have made landfall in Louisiana. These three storms, each with a lower pressure than Laura currently has. Hurricane Rita, we've talked a lot about Rita today, had pressure at 937. Laura, with the earlier updates, was down to 937. It's now ticked up a little bit. 934, the last island hurricane, that was way back in history. Then Hurricane Katrina, all of us know about that one, had a pressure of 920 millibars. We continue to highlight the threat for storm surge with this system. 15 to 20 feet of storm surge will be possible for parts of coastal Louisiana, along the core and just to the east. But why is that the area that sees the biggest concern with the storm surge? Well, that's because that's where you get the biggest onshore push of wind based on the way that these systems are rotating. Remember, a hurricane is just low pressure over water, so you get that same counterclockwise motion. So where the center is moving onshore and for areas just to the east, you see these arrows here? That's the onshore flow, and that's going to help to push the water up into those coastal areas. And as the National Hurricane Center was saying, in some instances, maybe inundating up to 30 miles inland on the coastal plains. Meanwhile, on the western side of that storm, yeah, your winds are in the offshore direction typically, and that means you don't have that same push of water heading up towards the coastline. But nonetheless, we are, again, probably a couple of hours now away from landfall. It's a high-end Cat 4 with winds of 150 miles per hour. We'll be watching this thing minute by minute as it rolls in. We'll have more updates later on this evening. Quita.
All right, thank you, Hunter. And you know what? Let's take another live look outside tonight. Back in Galveston as we track Hurricane Laura approaching the coast. And we are still, as Hunter said, a couple of hours away from the eye wall hitting land. And in Galveston, they are actually hopefully going to be a little bit lucky. It looks like the storm's not going to hit there very hard, if at all.
That's right, Chief Meteorologist Erica Lopez, Hunter Williams. They're both here keeping a close eye on things tonight. We'll have more from them coming up in just a bit. Time for a quick break. Stay with us. More to come here on the News at 10. The news at 10, we do want to show you some photos from southeastern Louisiana this afternoon. This is right before sundown. The town of Golden Meadow, not far from Thibodaux in southwest of New Orleans. Not many people there now, but you can see there the water over the roadways in that part of Louisiana because of that storm surge we've been talking a lot about. Not a whole lot of rain there at this point, but that surge, this push of water up to the coast and up through that marshland covering the roadways there in southeast Louisiana. Again, this is an area just southwest of New Orleans, not far from Thibodaux, if you've ever been to that part. It's kind of near the toe of the boot, Quita, as you look at Louisiana.
The toe of the boot, you say?
That's right.
I've been to the toe of the boot.
Go ahead, after you, please.
Well, I was just going to check back in with KVUE's Bryce Newberry tonight. He's at the Austin Convention Center, and crews have been getting ready to turn that into a shelter for evacuees. As a matter of fact, I think that's already been done. Is that right, Bryce?
Yeah, Quita, so there were a few fire trucks parked behind us when we checked in with you earlier. Those fire trucks actually just left, but they were part of the crews inside helping to get things organized and set up here at the convention center. Like I mentioned earlier in the show, we saw them inside there, Red Cross volunteers also using tape measures just to make sure that the cots that they've set up are following the proper COVID-19 distancing guidelines. So the goal for the city was to get this convention center open for evacuees by 11 o'clock. We haven't seen any start showing up out here just yet, but again, the plan was shooting for 11 o'clock.
Hey, Bryce, you've been able to take a look inside there of the convention center, and we do know that they were staging this to be more of an overflow for COVID-19 patients, were there to be many that needed to go somewhere. Is that what they're using now for this shelter? Is it the same area?
So the city did make it clear that the convention center is still available as an alternate care site for hospital overflow patients, but they have separated it. So there's obviously lots of different exhibit halls and ballrooms here at the convention center. So the actual exhibit hall where the cots are set up for evacuees is separate, at least from what we could see and from what the city has told us, from where the alternate care site is already set up, but not being used.
Okay, thank you, Bryce. And we are going to take another quick break and come right back with more on Hurricane Laura as it continues to approach the Gulf Coast. Stay with us.
To KVUE News, one final note to bring you tonight. Some breaking news, in fact, not tied to the storm. NBA teams making a huge announcement today. Here's Sports Director Jeff Jones and sports reporter Jake Garcia.
Guys, as you can see, we're doing things in sports a little differently tonight. We're giving you a backyard conversation is what I like to call it. He's Jake Garcia, I'm Jeff Jones, and the reason we're doing things like this in a very conversational style is because there's plenty to talk about in the sports world. Jake, 3 NBA playoff games, 3 WNBA